Our first speaker is Araceli, and she's going to hear for really the future of all of us, the future of education, the future of our young people. So welcome, Araceli.
Hi, my name is Araceli, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming here today and helping my education and my future. And I'll see you guys on the picket line. And somebody here wanted me to say something else, and if you guys aren't on the picket line, I'll come to your door and steal every piece of candy that you own.
Lines and marches this last week for City College to protect one of the largest public community colleges in the country. And I'm sure Araceli and young people want the right to go to a college, which is accessible, and we have a terrific community college system here in San Francisco, and that is really being threatened by what is going on, the privatization, the revocation of their accreditation. So our first speaker is a person that has put her life really on the line, her job on the line. Her name is Kathleen Carroll, and she was a lawyer at the Commission on Teacher Credentials. How many people know about CTC, Commission on Teacher Credentials? Okay, they license the teachers of California and also run higher education programs and other kinds of things and testing. And she began to discover, working at this commission, which has a lot of power in California, that in fact, not only were they not doing their job properly, but also they were doing many illegal things. And that the people running this commission really had other interests other than public education in mind. And she began to speak out about what was going on at the commission, and she was called for an investigation, an audit, which was done. But in my view, the audit was really a cover-up. They didn't. If you've ever been to a state audit, many of you probably haven't, you think that there would be. Pardon me?
I said, what have you gotten that is the trade? You know what I mean? Because people, not those people want to be homeless.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And the people that do get their hands on other people's finance, and with you being the recordings, or you know what I mean, stuff without the vision, because vision has pronouns.
Yeah, well, there was a state audit, and she put her job on the line by requesting the audit, and what happened was that at this audit, which I saw on video, I wasn't able to be there, none of the legislators, and it was a Senate and Assembly Joint Legislative Commission, they had not one question for her about what was going on. I mean, now this is amazing. Here you have a whistleblower who's talking about serious systemic problems in the Commission on Teacher Credentials, and there's not one question by anybody there about what's going on and why it's happening when she has all this information. That was shocking, and actually it showed that they really weren't interested in getting to what was going on at the commission. But despite that, she's continued to speak out and organize, and since her leaving the Commission on Teacher Credentials, where she's terminated and fighting for her job back, and there's presently a pending lawsuit, federal lawsuit, she has been speaking out and trying to educate the public about what's going on. So welcome, Kathleen Carroll.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming here on giving up your Sunday afternoon. As Steve mentioned, I was fired actually right in the middle of the state audit that I called for. I'm not going to talk about so much that today. I'm kind of here with heavy heart after the acquittal of George Zimmerman. You all may have different feelings about it. I don't know how much you've been following the case, but I feel it's a real human tragedy, and so very upset about that. And since I've been fired, I've been doing a lot of research, organizing parents and teachers. I've met with workers, not just education workers, but all workers. In fact, yesterday we were in Oakland protesting a Gulen charter school, and Sharon Higgins is here, and she's going to talk more about that and has a lot more knowledge about that. But while I was there, I got to meet up with a BART worker, and his name was Alan Hawley. And he heard me talking, and he stopped me, and he said, you know, you're just too educated, you're too intellectual the way you're speaking. We need to talk about the basics, the necessities. He talked about you need to speak to the people about the necessities: food, education, transportation, health care, clean air, and water. And if we don't take to the streets and make our public officials accountable to us, because we are a government for the people, by the people, of the people, and demand that the cuts stop bleeding everyone and making everyone homeless, he said we're going to be all slaves.
Yeah.
And I took that to heart, and so I wanted to thank Alan for saying that to me, because over the last 3 years, I've learned a lot from people who have been through a lot of pain, and education is not the only thing that is hurting right now. But here in San Francisco, I'd like to get a kind of a show of hands. How many people here are affected by the City College of San Francisco's revocation of their accreditation? Okay. And how many people here are either involved in or affected by K-12 education? Okay. So I never know. One time I went and everyone was higher ed people, so I focused my discussion on that. So I have so much in my head, and I want to be brief because we have some great speakers here. But in terms of public education, it is really being taken over by corporate Wall Street, corporate America. And there's so many great groups and sites that have formed literally across the country. As you know, there's the charter school movement, and the charter schools can be operated by private corporations called charter management organizations. And I've talked to teachers who actually work in charter schools, and I've also been attacked, and I'm very open-minded to hearing what they have to say. And they said there's some charter schools that are actually doing good work. And I said, that's great. I hope so, because they're getting our tax dollars. The issue I have with charter schools is the lack of public accountability, the lack of a public school board, the lack of openness and transparency in their finances. Why do I know that? Because there's been public record requests, and they often hide their books. They often hire friends and family members and give themselves very high six-figure salaries. How do I know that? I worked with one. And she failed to disclose not only her own conflicts, and she was a public member of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, but she failed to disclose that her husband was an administrator at the charter school. She failed to disclose that she was being paid by the California Charter School Association. She failed to disclose that she was on the board of Magnolia Public Schools. She failed to disclose that another commissioner sitting on the commission with her was the founder and executive director of another nonprofit called All Star Helping Kids, and his foundation was funding her charter school. She failed to other commissioners failed to disclose that they were on nonprofits. It's a constant conflict of interest, and I truly believe these people do not deserve to be in public service. Just recently, as I was checking my email, and I now get hundreds of email, a new group has formed, and it was formed by a parent activist. Her name is Ellen Lubick. And Sherry may have gotten the same email. I got it from Diane Ravitch. But her group is called Joining Forces to Help Parents Fight Off Corporate Takeovers. And I'm just going to read you a little quote from what she sent out today. She said, "Imagine this. An earnest young man or woman comes to your neighborhood, even rents out a house there, and buttonholes parents to collect their grievances against the neighborhood school. What about that principal? Is there a teacher you don't like? Do you need more of this or less of that? Sign here. Sign the petition, and we can make them change. One day, if they are successful, you won't have a neighborhood school. Instead, it will belong to a charter corporation. It will have its own board, and it may kick out your child. It is called divide and conquer. If parents are kept at bay and do not have a common cause of their neighborhood public school, they are easier to fool, to manage, to usurp. Yes, a low form of social engineering. This particularly pernicious form of privatization is spreading like wildfire across the United States. We must join together to educate the community about parent trigger laws and how the inner city parents are manipulated to sign phony petitions to essentially give their schools away to free market for-profit charters. So when Steve said we need to unite, I'm often frustrated because I think we all are separating our issues. The education group has their own bubble. The healthcare workers and nurses on strike have their own bubble. The BART workers have their own bubble. School personnel are not just teachers that are affected. Bus drivers, janitorial staff, certificated personnel, they're losing their jobs in the tens of thousands. Millions if you look across the country. I'm talking about just here in the state of California. So we really do need to get out in the streets. We need to be like Egypt. Egypt and Brazil, who have taken to the streets in millions because they're tired of their government saying there's a crisis, and yet they're spending millions and millions of dollars on the World Cup, while austerity measures and cuts to their basic services, which again, food, education, shelter, transportation, and because that started with a bus hike. If we don't do that, we're going to lose our freedoms. We're going to lose our privacy, which potentially we've already lost, as we know, Edward Snowden, and I don't know how all of you feel about what he's done. I cheer him on because I don't think that our government officials who represent us should be hacking into our emails, profiling us, and spying on us. Also, I don't support our government in spending billions and trillions possibly in government contracts to cause human suffering in other countries through government defense contracts. And if we stay silent, we are essentially guilty of allowing the killing of human beings across the world and here at home. And we really need to stand up and do something about that. I am going to shift gears to the higher ed because I think there's other people going to be talking about K-12. I've got numerous calls recently about the City College of San Francisco. I have been doing my own research on the accrediting bodies for quite some time. And as some of you may or may not know, so I'm going to go through a kind of a short history. The accrediting bodies are private entities. They're nonprofit organizations. They've existed since the late 1800s. There actually wasn't a U.S. Department of Education until 1979 under Jimmy Carter. Prior to that, there were offices of education. It was under the Department of Interior. There were bureaus of education, but it really didn't become a full-fledged department until 1979. But the criticisms of the accrediting bodies in influencing academic freedom and institutional autonomy have been there for a very, very long time. And as I researched and looked, as a lawyer, I look for statutes. I look for laws that regulate these entities that essentially are trying to dictate to the City College of San Francisco what they must do, not just ensure an educational quality, which is what their initial purpose was, because there was a lot of concern about fraud. Fraudulent claims that people who have gotten a 4-year degree, a baccalaureate degree or higher, were coming out of flagship organizations, and there was a lot of cronyism and nepotism. Well, now we look at, here we are, 2013, and we're looking at these agencies as not being the insurers of educational quality, but actually being the abusers and fraudsters. And as I look for statute, the only statute, first of all, the federal government does not have a constitutional right to regulate education or higher education. It's not enumerated in the US Constitution, so it's a state function. The state should be regulating K-12 and higher ed. They fail to do so. And so we need to demand that they do so. ACCJC, which I think used to be under WASC, has no enabling statute. What does that mean? There is no law on the books setting forth the parameters by which they shall act. And without an enabling statute, you can never say, well, here's the rules by which they should act, and if they act outside those rules, they're acting ultra vires, or they're abusing their discretion. Well, how convenient is that? In 1974, the Commission on Education published criteria. The federal code by which the criteria has, and it's been through numerous amendments, is 20 USC, and that's United States Code 1099. They said that they are, the first time they're recognized as being on this nationally recognized list of accrediting agencies that states had to use was in 1952, and that was part of the GI Bill. But in 74, for the first time, the US government said that they had an obligation, these accrediting agents, to protect the public interest, which includes putting representatives of the public on their commission, to conduct themselves ethically, which includes non-discriminatory practices in admissions and in employment, for example, and encouraging innovation and experimental programs. Well, gone in 1988 was the encouragement of innovation and experimental programs. And since 1974, there has been numerous amendments of these criteria. But we are left with this, essentially, what they have is these interstate agreements that the states must get their accreditation in order to get their federal funds to be accredited as an institution that offers degrees or financial assistance, federal assistance programs, to act through these private, essentially private entities that have no legal parameters by which they can act. I want to read to you a speech that was supposedly a famous speech. It comes out of a law review article, and I can give you guys the site later, but this person, his name was Samuel Capon, and he was then the chancellor of University of Buffalo. And this is a speech that came from 1939. And he actually was a supporter of the accreditation movement. And there really was a movement, and there was a lot of contention throughout the centuries, literally. But this is what he said in his speech. And he was angry at this point. Responsible administrators of influential institutions in various parts of the country are tired of having the educational and financial policies of their institutions dictated by a horde of irresponsible outsiders, each representing a separate selfish interest. The issue is plain. Is the American university system to be dominated by competitive blackmail, or is it to be conducted in accordance with the best judgment of the charters and through legislative enactments? The American universities gave the standardizing agencies license to live. Whenever the leaders of the universities are ready to unite in the decision that these agencies shall live no longer, they will disappear. I think that day approaches. That day never came. But I encourage all of you from City College and anyone that cares about higher education to contact your chairs, department chairs, and your educational leaders, because our politicians have abandoned the issue. They seem more concerned about their campaign coffers being filled by the privatizers than they do about the interest of a free, quality education, and that's pre-K through higher ed. Everyone deserves a free, quality education. Everyone deserves a quality living wage with safe working conditions, and we will not go away. The union doesn't seem to be fighting this as well, but we welcome them to join us. We do not ask for their permission. We do not need it. We do not care if they support us, because we will unite, we will fight this, and we will not be quieted, silenced, until everyone has a free, quality education, until everyone has a living wage with safe working conditions, and until everyone has the ability to speak up without fear of retaliation. There's a great, great book on the whole history of what he actually did. It's called Den of Thieves, and it was written by James Stewart, and I believe he won an award for the book. It was written quite a few years ago. And Predator's Ball, which was written by Connie Bruck. And it really talks about the insider trading, all the scams that they were committing, all the, literally billions and billions of dollars. This was back in the 80s. He ended up getting convicted, not on insider trading charges. He pled to something less. And he ended up serving only 22 months in prison in Pleasanton here in California. Ivan Boesky, same thing. He was involved in very, very serious fraud, inside trading crimes. That's all in this book, Den of Thieves. And he served in Lompoc, which I don't know if you know, but it used to be like, they called it the countryside prison. There were tennis courts, sauna rooms. He served a very, very low sentence, unlike Bernie Madoff. I actually just read that book, No One Would Listen, by Harry Markopolos. I just want to say about online education and Michael Milken. We are giving tax dollars, our public education tax dollars, to Michael Milken in numerous forms. K-12 Inc. is the largest online education company in the United States. Michael Milken is a major holder of that. K-12 is a publicly traded company, but Michael Milken, Lowell Milken, his brother, and what is his name? Larry Ellison. Those are the three major founders of K-12 Inc. And they own a conglomerate company that owns numerous other education operations, and that conglomerate is called Knowledge Universe. So I urge you all to Google Knowledge Universe and look at all the array of everything from pre-K to higher ed online education companies. They even own KinderCare, and I'm sure a lot of you heard of KinderCare. So online education is big money. Pearson, I don't know, I can't remember, Jack did such a great job of covering a lot of bases. And but Pearson is a major, major conglomerate. They own a lot of things. They own tests, they own even the GED, they own the National Assessment Test, the NEEP test. They own Adobe. I mean, they're just a major, major, huge player, and they're given, again, government contracts. So what is happening here is our public education system, they say we have a crisis. Well, the crises are all these companies who are making huge profits, while traditional public education, pre-K, K-12, and higher ed is getting defunded and out of the public hands. They're going to testing companies, online education companies. Lumina Wested is another entity, which is a regional quasi-governmental nonprofit entity. There's a lot of nonprofit abuse because they're supposed to be doing charitable purposes under 501c3, but now they're just profiting like crazy. Wested is also funded by NCS Pearson, by Lumina Foundation, which is heavily involved in privatizing community colleges, and it's funded by the Department of Defense. U.S. Department of Education funds it. They get funding from local school districts, State Department of Education. I mean, you have to pull up their annual reports. I have a couple years worth at home, and I was literally shocked about how many people are funding, how many entities are funding Wested. So they're a major, major player. So when we talk about crisis, the crisis is created by the profiteers, by the fraudsters who are making huge money through government contracts. And that's where the money's going.
Community college, who's on the board there?
Yeah, community, there's so many conflicts. I mean, I could go on forever, but it seems more important that we have you all engage and contribute to this discussion. But Joseph Blansky, for example, he is on the Board of Governors for the Community College District. Joseph Blansky, well, he was an ACCJC commissioner. Barbara Beano, he worked at Peralta Community College District. Barbara Beano came from Peralta Community College District. Deborah Blue came from Peralta Community College District. She's the vice president of ACCJC. Bryce Harris used to be the chancellor of Los Rios Community College District. He was heavily involved in the Sac Metro Chamber of Commerce. There's always these business ties, but more importantly with Bryce Harris is not only was he a former ACCJC commissioner, he was on the Student Success Task Force, which was enacted to strip community colleges and to privatize it. That was their sole goal. And if you don't believe me, just look at the members of Student Success Task Force. One of them, Ted Mitchell. Who is Ted Mitchell? He's a venture capitalist. He started New School Venture Fund. What is New School Venture Fund? They're the ones that gave the feed money for Green Dot and Aspire and numerous other online ventures. So that's who our elected officials who are supposed to be representing us are giving money to and appointing to these commissions and bodies to strip money. Why? Because they have money to feed their campaign coffers and we don't. And we need to say no, enough is enough. We need to take our schools back, we need to take our healthcare back, we need to take this country back.